When the only constant in life is change, you need to be ready. This is the Man-Made Survival Show.
Hello everyone, my name is Jose Pro, Man-Made Survival. Thank you so much for coming back to the channel and watching this video. So what we're going to be talking about today is really important because, of course, if you've paid any attention to everything that's going on right now, we are getting the pieces in place for us to go to war against China. Like I've explained in another podcast, is that we're starting to blame them, pretty much on the speculation that China hid the information on purpose, or the fact that they simply hid it was an act of war, as a lot of people said, right? And of course, we're having disputes about the personal protective equipment and so on and so forth. And of course, NATO, as I've shared before, now they're taking a close look at China because, their power is increasing. They're becoming more powerful with their military and other aspects as well. So, of course, it's something that the United States has been looking into, right? And, of course, the coronavirus has really devastated our economy. We have spent a lot of money. We're at $25 trillion in debt. We're spent over $1 trillion in just 28 days. So now there's going to be another round of stimulus checks, which of course is going to bring us into $3 more trillion in debt if they pass it. The House passed it, now we're waiting on the Senate. So we'll see how that turns out to be. And of course, with the entire coronavirus dilemma or problems that we're having, we're blaming China more and more, and the blame is starting to become more, instead of being a speculation, it's starting to become more like confirmed. Things that we have said in the independent media for a long time, which, of course, if you said any of those things, you were a conspiracy theorist, and now the mainstream media is coming out and saying it, reporting on it, and the government itself is starting to say the same things that the independent media was saying for a very long time. So when you think about those things, where is it all going to go? So we have to get prepared for World War III, as far as the citizens go, you and I as preppers and other people alike. Because World War III, of course, is not, this time it could very likely come to our shores. We're used to fighting wars in other countries, right? We go to Afghanistan, we go to Iraq, all those places. We always go to them. They never come to us. But with a superpower or two superpowers against the United States, that battle more than likely will come to our shores. That's why you have to get ready for it. So if you have not listened to the previous podcast that I did as far as the weapon systems that Russia and China possesses, then I suggest, or I advise you to go listen to those things, because you have to understand what type of weapons your enemy has in order for you to prepare accordingly. Because the hypersonic technology can deliver an ICBM in just within 10 minutes. It depends from where it's being fired. For example, if one gets fired from Venezuela, it will reach Miami in less than 3 minutes. And I know that sounds mind-blowing, but it's a fact of life. That's why it's important for you to get books like mine, Preppers Secrete Cache, that it will give you the information you need on ways to prepare. It will give you ideas. You'll have the know-how when something like that happens. All right, I want to read to you something from the book. Here it is. Get your supplies ready. Don't say that someday you will get your supplies ready. Make it a top priority so that you can have peace of mind that you do have everything ready. In a previous chapter, you will find a list of all the essential items you should have on hand. If you have others that you would like to add, that is fine, but don't leave out any of the listed essentials. That's just a part of the book. So I'm trying to, or what I try to do in the book is that I try to tell you, right, that you have to get prepared today. Like today is the day for you to get all those things ready, because if we do go to war with China and an ICBM is going to hit in your area within the next 5 minutes and you don't know what to do, then you're going to be in a world of hurt because you were not prepared. That's why we have to get prepared today. Because if things happen a year from now, 10 years from now, then you will have all this time and you will be better off than if you waited for the last minute And remember, when a lot of the times when you wait to the last minute, you do a bad job, and all the things that you think you need, you can't have them. That's exactly what we saw when people were panic buying when the coronavirus hit the United States. A lot of people who were not ready, what happened? The toilet paper was gone, and they couldn't get any toilet paper at all. And then when all that shifted to food, what happened? People were trying to get groceries, and they no longer could. So that's why you have to get prepared today, not at the last minute, like this past crap has hit the fan scenario happened. But anyway, so now that we're talking about, coronavirus, China, blaming, the conversation or the rhetoric has turned into more confirmed, yes, they did it on purpose type of deal. All right, so the first headline that I have for you pretty much tells you the tone, the Donald Trump is taking it, and of course the government as well. Here it is. Trump says coronavirus worst attack on U.S. since Pearl Harbor. Live updates. This from ZeroHedge.com. And I have a video for that. Here it is.
We went through the worst attack we've ever had in our country. This is really the worst attack we've ever had. This is worse than Pearl Harbor. This is worse than the World Trade Center. There's never been an attack like this. And it should have never happened. Could have been stopped at the source. Could have been stopped in China. It should have been stopped right at the source. And it wasn't.
All right, so Trump saying those things, that sets the tone on how he's taking it. Because an attack, worst attack on the U.S. since Pearl Harbor, those are very strong words. Those are fighting words, right? So I want you to think about it this way. If we have an ICBM coming our direction, what we're going to do? For one, we're going to try our best to knock it out of the air. And two, we're going to retaliate, sending an ICBM to the person who sent us one, right? An eye for an eye. So if this is a bioweapon, which now they're starting to say it probably is, if it's a bioweapon, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to send them a bioweapon? What approach is the Pentagon going to take? That's still, that's still a scenario that we have to wait and see. But the fact of the matter is that train of thought is what's starting to move the entire government into going to that direction. Now, like I've said before, it doesn't matter what you and I think about the virus, whether it's fake or not, and all the things that go along with it. What really, really matters is what the Pentagon and the government and Donald Trump think about it, because he holds the codes to the nuclear weapons. So here's my next headline, and it's going to go into detail about what I'm, trying to say. Here it is. Bombshell. Five Eyes Western intelligence dossier claims China lied about coronavirus. This from Daily Mail. China lied about the human-to-human transmission of coronavirus, made whistleblowers disappear, and refused to help nations develop a vaccine, a leaked intelligence dossier revealed. A 15-page document drawn up by the Five Eyes Security Alliance brands Beijing secrecy over the pandemic as, quote, an assault on international transparency, end quote, and points to cover-up tactics deployed by the regime. It claims that the Chinese government silenced its most vocal critics and scrubbed any online skepticism about its handling of the health emergency from the internet. The smoking gun file claims to have found evidence the virus spawned in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, close to the wet market China says it came from, and unearthing risky research on bat-related disease stretching back years. It describes how Beijing was outwardly downplaying the outbreak on the world stage while secretly scrambling to bury all traces of the disease. China's alleged actions involved destroying the laboratory samples, bleaching wet market stalls, and censoring the growing evidence of silent carriers of the virus and stonewalling samples requests from other countries. The secrecy has fanned a clamor in Five Eyes nations for Western governments to come down hard on Beijing when the pandemic eventually passes. All right, so what is that going to be? How, in what manner can the Western alliances go against China? So when countries talk that way, you can see clearly that could lead to a nuclear confrontation. So now, or a few months ago, you were a conspiracy nut if you talked about where it came from, which would be in Wuhan. And of course, you have Fauci saying there's no evidence. You had the mainstream media saying that if you had people in your family that said that it came from a virus, to pretty much call them out and tell them they're crazy. But now the intelligence alliances are saying the very same thing, that it did come from a lab in Wuhan. So now that's in the open, you have to understand that it's very important that they have said that, because if you remember back in January, we killed Qasem Soleimani just so we killed Qasem Soleimani because we acted on intelligence that we were given, by the Pentagon. So in those days, they were saying that that they were working on attacking one of our embassies, so we strike preemptively so that wouldn't happen. So of course the Pentagon takes what the alliances say very seriously. Now they're saying that yes, it did come from Wuhan. Now the thing that they have to, I guess, try to figure out is if they did it on purpose or not. Because if they did do it on purpose, then it's an act of war. An act of war that the Pentagon is going to take serious, that's going to make us go into war. All right. So my next headline goes into details on how China, now they're starting to see what we're printing on papers, what we're talking on TV, and the sentiment that we're starting to see in the country as far as the citizens goes. All right, here's the next headline. It could be war. Classified Chinese report warns Beijing it faces Tiananmen-like global backlash over coronavirus that could lead to armed confrontation with the United States. This from the Daily Mail. The report was drawn up by the China Institute of Contemporary International Relations, which is the CICR, a think tank affiliated with the Ministry of State Security, China's top intelligence body. Relations between China and the United States are widely seen to be in their worst point in decades, with deepening mistrusts and frictions from the U.S. allegations of unfair trade and technology practices to disputes over Hong Kong, Taiwan, and contested territories in the South China Sea. In recent days, U.S. President Donald Trump, facing more difficult re-election campaign as the coronavirus has claimed tens of thousands of Americans' lives and ravaged the U.S. economy, has been ramping up his criticism of Beijing and threatening new tariffs on China. His administration, meanwhile, is considering retaliatory measures against China over the outbreak, officials said. It is widely believed in Beijing that the United States wants to contain a rising China, which has become more assertive globally as its economy has grown. All right, so you really have to remember that last part, because it's going to be very important on what I'm going to be pointing out in later in the podcast. So I'm going to read it one more time. It is widely believed in Beijing, as far as the government and probably the people go, that the United States want to contain a rising China, which has become more assertive globally as its economy has grown. So again, the Chinese government, they're starting to see that trend, that we're blaming them, that, not just some wacko that decides to go on TV and says, no, we're talking about key people, right? And also Trump is talking that way. He doesn't want to talk to Xi Jinping right now. We're talking about going on another trade war. So things will escalate. And now we're trying to get Taiwan to join the UN, which of course is really making Beijing angry, because China sees Taiwan as part of their territory, even though they don't control it. And they want it back by 2050. So, of course, we're doing things that are going to make China angry, and we're going to provoke them, right? So on the next headline that I have for you, it's kind of goes along the lines that publicly U.S. officials are talking about how the government is starting to look at China and the whole coronavirus deal. All right, here's the headline. Chinese leader ordered to prepare for war with America amid COVID-19 fallout. This from neonneedle.com. Over the weekend, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo revealed that the government now has, quote, enormous evidence, end quote, that the global coronavirus pandemic originated in a lab in Wuhan, China. Quote, there's enormous evidence that that's where this began, end quote, Pompeo said on ABC's This Week. We've said it from the beginning that this was a virus that originated in Wuhan, China. He continued, we took a lot of grief from that from the outset, but I think that the whole world can see now. Remember, China has the history of infecting the world, and they have a history of running substandard laboratories, he added. All right, so those are things that China are seeing. Because if the government, the Secretary of State is saying out in the open, on record, that there's evidence that it did come from a lab in Wuhan, then the next thing is, are we going to blame them for it? Did they do it on purpose or not? So all of that is going to lead us to war, like I've said, a few minutes ago. So what are you to do about it? Of course, you have to get ready for war, because if you live in a populated area like New York, California, Washington State, Atlanta, just name a major city, you're seeing the impact of the lockdown right now. Now imagine if you had a nuclear device go off in that city. Of course, the chaos would be greater than what it is right now. But the other thing that you would see is that a lot of people would be desperate, fleeing the area, right? So that's why you have to get prepared. If you live in a city, in a major city, you have to make plans right now, because it looks like we're going that direction, right? You have to make plans that if you're going to have to flee your city, let's say that your city, your major city, does not get nuked, right? Let's say Los Angeles gets nuked, but not New York. People in New York, you would have time to get out of there, because I'm telling you, you will probably be the next target. Of course, they would try to attack all the major cities that they will want all at once, because, that would make it easier on them to do a surprise attack and blow up all those cities. But let's say that in your major city, nothing happened. You need to get out of there as quickly as you can, because you could be next. So that's why you're going to have a bug out location. You're going to have a place to go. Whether you buy it, if you have enough money, because there's a lot of people in New York that make a lot of money. And even for the people who do not, you're going to have to buy or have a place to go to if something was to happen. Okay? And you're going to have to be able to feed your family. You're going to have to be able to survive. That's where the survival thing comes in, right? Because if you don't have a place to go, you will become a refugee. And then you have to go either to a government camp, or you would just have to live in the wilderness. It all depends. And none of that is far-fetched. Like, those are possible scenarios. Just like the coronavirus, a pandemic has always been a scenario for the preppers. And it's something that a lot of people say it would never happen. Here we are. Well, it doesn't matter what you believe, whether it's a hoax or not. We're seeing the repercussions of the government believing that it's real. You see what I'm trying to say? You see what I'm trying to convey? That since the government are the ones who are taking this as it's real and is an imminent threat, they're taking action. It's the same thing they're going to do with China, right? So here's my next headline, and I want to point something out, but let me read it all. Let me read it all first. Here's the headline: U.S. would lose a war with China fought in the Pacific. Is unable to defend Taiwan from the invasion, and there are fears that one military base is at risk now. Pentagon sources warn. This from Daily Mail. Eye-opening Pentagon war games have revealed growing fears of the U.S. is vulnerable to threats from China, and that any attack would lead to the U.S. suffering capital losses, the source said. U.S. defense sources told the Times that one Pentagon simulation based on the year 2030, when China would have new attack submarines, aircraft carriers, and destroyers, result in the U.S. being overwhelmed by the nation's force. Quote, every simulation that has been conducted looking at the threat from China by 2030 have all ended up with a defeat of the U.S., end quote, said Glacier. Quote, Taiwan is the most volatile issue because that could escalate to a war with the U.S., even to nuclear war. In the Pentagon and State Department, the White House, China is now seen as the biggest threat. We have been too passive in the past, end quote. All right, so those are very powerful words, right? They are seeing China as a threat in 2030. So if they're not a big threat right now, but they are a big threat in 2030, what do you think they're going to do? That brings back what I told you to remember, which I'm going to read for you again, what it was said in the article, the article title, It Could Be War. It is widely believed in Beijing, which would be their government, that the United States wants to contain a rising China, which has become more assertive globally as its economy has grown. All right, so let's say that the Pentagon is telling people, right, that since they are going to be a big threat by 2030, that would mean that they would have to take care of them now, right? So it doesn't matter how you want to look at it, whether it's 10 years from now that we go to war, or it'll be a year or two from now that we go to war. It looks like we're going to war either way, whether it's now or 10 years from now, right? This is why it's important for you to prepare, right? That is why it's important for you to go ahead and make preparations, because if it happens 10 years from now, you've had 10 years to prepare for it. If it happens a year from now, you've had a year to prepare for it. That's why it's important for you to act today. And what you're going to do, you have to look in how they would attack. Of course, you have to study your area, because if you live very close to a nuclear power plant, that could either be a target, or the byproduct of a BMP would be that power plant would melt down, and we will see what we saw in Fukushima. And if that is in your backyard, then you're gonna have to get away from it as far as you can. And we have so many of them in the United States, so many. I don't know the exact number right now, but I know we have them all throughout the United States. So a nuclear meltdown would be very devastating for the United States. All right, so that would probably be our Achilles heel. But anyways, I'm bringing you this information so you can understand that either today, a month from now, or 10 years from now, we're going to war with China. And if we go to war against China, you can bet that Russia will be in it. All right. That's why it's important for you to read books like mine, Preppers Secrete Cache. We go into detail on things that you need to do to prepare with, and scenarios such as nuclear war, against China and Russia. So I encourage you to order the book. It's free. It's totally free. All you have to help us with is the shipping. The book retails for $24.99, and the shipping, I think, is like $10. So yes, you're getting it for free. All right. So I encourage you to get it, because we talk about those scenarios here in the book, and I'm gonna read to you something real quick. All right. So I said this in the book. Nuclear war nowadays is just a sanction or territorial dispute between the most powerful nuclear powers on the planet away. The president of China, Xi Jinping, gave a speech to his entire military in 2018, urging them to not to be worried about dying for their country and to be battle ready at a moment's notice. Russia held their biggest military exercise with Chinese participation in 2018, and Russia also plans on having thousands of drills in 2019 alone. NATO has also done major military exercises to prove that they can take on any military threat in Europe. The world is full of flashpoints, so it would be wise to prepare before beginning of World War III occurs. And that is true, because, like I've said, Taiwan is one of those territories. The South China Sea is one of those territories that we would go to war against China with. That's the whole simulation that they played. U.S. would lose a war with China for in the Pacific. It's unable to defend Taiwan from invasion, and there are fears that one military base at risk now, right? So those headlines are playing right before your eyes. You know, that scenario that I wrote in this book is playing right before your eyes. So that's what would be important for you to get the knowledge that's in this book, which is free, and prepare accordingly, because those are no longer scenarios that could possibly happen. They're happening now, and they're getting ready for it. Like I said, it may happen 10 years from now, and just think, in how much better off would you be if you were ready for it, or you had 10 years to get ready for it? You know, you have so many redundancies as opposed to if it happened 2 months from now, especially with the economic collapse that we're seeing now and thousands of people out of work. If you're one of those people that's out of work, how could you prepare it for a war if it happened 2 months from now? So if it happened 10 years from now, 8 years from now, 6 years from now, however long the military thinks that they will still have the upper hand by the time we had a war with China, that's how long you would have to prepare. We don't know exactly when, but you have at least 10 years. And that sounds like a long time, but it's really not. So think about it. All right. So remember, get prepared, get your family ready for it, and keep up with the news so that it doesn't become a surprise. If they try to surprise attack the nation, at least you will see it coming, as we're seeing it coming here in this podcast. So again, my name is Jose Prado, and remember, always ready.
The Man-Made Survival Show.